In this tutorial, we're going to use our CPU particles to create a dash effect that leaves behind ghost images of our player to create some motion blur. So if you followed my previous tutorials, we have a player particle manager set up. If you don't have it right now, it's just a simple script. And we are going to extend on this player particle manager. The first thing we need to do, though, is we need to create a new scene. We are going to create a sprite 2D. And we're going to attach a script to it, but let's call it first the ghost sprite. And let's attach our script to it. It can just be called ghost sprite as well. And let's give it a class name of ghost sprite. And in here, we don't really have to do much. All we are going to do is change two properties. We're going to go into our modulate. And all we're going to be doing is we can do on the raw, everything can be 1, except we're going to do 0.15 on the alpha to give us a little bit of transparency. And then we're also going to adjust the scale. Make sure you unlink the X and Y, and we're going to do 1.2 on our X and 0.9 on the Y. Inside of the script, we are going to create two export variables, which are going to be our max stretch width, is a float. We're going to default this to 1.5. Another one, which is going to be our min stretch width, or stretch height, which is also going to be a float. And we're going to default this to 0.7. So these are going to control how much the ghost image of our player can stretch and shrink. We're going to have only one method in here, and it's going to be called start fade. We're going to pass in a lifetime, which is a float. It's not going to return anything. And inside of this, we're going to create a tween variable where we create a tween, which is going to set up all of our effects that we're going to need inside of this tween. In the tween, we're going to do tween.parallel.tween property. And inside of this, we're going to pass in ourself the scale property. And then we're going to give it a vector2 of our max stretch width. I should spell that correctly. And our min stretch height, and our lifetime. We also need to do a tween.parallel, another tween property, and we're going to pass in the self and the modulate property. We're going to give it 0.0 and our lifetime. And finally, we're going to do tween.tween callback and queue_free. Without the parens, though. Don't want to pass in with the parentheses. After this, we need to go back to our player particle manager, and we're going to update this script. So we're going to have a couple of constants, or actually just one constant. It's going to be our ghost sprite, and it's going to be a preload of our ghost sprite scene. And then we're going to have an export variable of the ghost lifetime, which is a float. And default this is 0.15, and this is just how long each ghost is going to last. And then we're going to have another export variable that's going to be our ghost spawn time, which is also a float. And we're going to do 0.008, which is how often we're spawning new ghosts. We have some regular variables of can spawn ghost, which is going to be a bool. We're going to default this to true. Another variable of a ghost timer, type timer, and current direction, which is going to be a vector2, and it's going to default to vector2.0. We also need to add one more child node in here. It's going to be a node 2D. We're going to call this, it's going to be our ghost container. We're going to drag this up here as an onReady variable. We're going to create our ready method. Inside of our ready method, we're just going to do some timer setup. We're going to create our ghost timer. It's going to be timer.new. Then we're going to set the wait time on our ghost timer, which is going to be equal to our ghost spawn time. Then we're going to set the one shot to true. Then we're going to connect on timeout to our ghost timer to a method that we haven't made yet, but it's going to be called reset ghost spawn. Then we're going to add our child of the ghost timer to the scene. Then we need to make a couple other methods to fill this out. We're going to have spawn ghost, which doesn't return anything. We're going to have our reset ghost spawn, which also doesn't return anything. And we have our start dash effect, which takes in a direction, which is of type vector2. Doesn't return anything either. And lastly, we're going to have our stop dash effect. In spawn ghost, we're first going to check if we can spawn a ghost. If we can't, we just return and don't do anything. Otherwise, we need to get references to our player components that we need to make this work. So we need to get our player, which is going to equal to get parent. We're going to have our player sprite, which is going to equal our player get node, and it's going to be able to sprite 2D. Then we're going to get our animation player, and we're going to get that same way that we did our sprite, get node, animation player. Now we need to instantiate our ghost. It's going to be equal to our ghost sprite constant, and we're going to instantiate this. And in our ghost container, we're going to add child of our ghost. Now we need to set some of our sprite properties all on this ghost. So we're going to ghost texture is our player sprite dot texture, ghost dot h-frames is our player sprite dot h-frames, ghost dot v-frames equals our player sprite dot v-frames. Our ghost frame is going to equal our player sprite dot frame. Our ghost flip h is going to equal our player sprite dot flip h. And lastly, our ghost's position is going to equal player sprite's position. Then we're going to start our fade. And I'm going to give it the ghost lifetime. We're going to can spawn ghost. It's going to be false. And we're going to start our timer. In our reset ghost spawn, we're going to set our can spawn ghost to true. And if we're still dashing, we want to keep spawning another ghost. We're going to do if get parent is dashing. I haven't added this. This is going to be a property we're going to put on our player, a variable we're going to put on our player. So if we are dashing, we spawn a ghost. In start dash effect, we're going to do our current direction. It's going to equal the direction we're passing in. And then we spawn a ghost. And then our stop dash effect, set our current direction equal vector 2, 0. So now we need to update this in our player script. Let's bring up our player script and our player scene. And we're going to need to add a couple of other export variables. I'm going to set this up as an export category. Just call it dashing. And in here, we're going to have our dash speed, which is a float. We're going to default this to 400. Another export variable of our dash duration, which is also a float. I'm going to default this to 0.1. And our final export variable of our dash cooldown, also a float, and it's going to equal to 1.0. We also need some other variables to just track our dash states. So we're going to have can dash is going to be a bool. It's going to be equal to true. Is dashing, which is what we referenced in the last file. It's going to be a bool. Default to false. Our dash direction, which is going to be a vector 2. It's going to be equal to vector 2.0. Our dash timer, so type timer, and lastly our cooldown timer, which is also a timer. And we just need to add a couple of methods at the bottom of our player script. We're going to have a start dash method, doesn't return anything. We have our end dash method, and we have our refresh dash method. We'll deal with end dash and refresh first. Those are going to be a little bit quicker and less code. So in end dash, we need to change our is dashing to false since we're not dashing anymore. Change our velocity to vector 2.0 so we aren't moving anymore. And if our player particle manager, which needs to be an on-ready variable on the player, if we have one, we're going to tap into our player particle manager, and we're going to stop our dash effect. In refresh dash, all we're doing is resetting can dash to true. In start dash, we need to set is dashing equal to true, can dash to false. Now we need to figure out which way we're actually going to dash. Our direction is going to equal input dot get axis left and right. These need to be set up in your input controls. And if the direction doesn't equal 0, then we change our dash direction. We'll leave vector 2 of the direction 0. Otherwise, we do our dash direction. Here's vector 2, -1 with sprite.fliph, else 1, otherwise 0. So in this bit, we're figuring out which way to dash, and if we don't have a direction, we're just basing it based off the direction that we're facing. We need to start our timer, so our dash timer dot start, our cooldown timer dot start, and then if player particle manager dot start dash effect, and give it the dash direction. Now that we have all of that set up, we actually need to make sure that our dash is set up so we can actually use it. So first we need to go into our project settings, and in our input map, we need to make a dash action. Let's add it. I'm going to use the right click for my dash. Then we need to handle it inside of our physics process. All we have to do in here is we need to check our input. So if input.isAction just press, it's going to be our dash, and we can dash, not is dashing. We get our direction, our input, get axis, our left and right. If we're not, is on floor, or the direction doesn't equal 0, then we start dash. If we are dashing, then we get our velocity.x, it's going to be equal to our dash direction.x times our dash speed. Our velocity.y is going to be our gravity.y times delta times 0.5. And then we move and slide and return. Now the last thing we have to do, just like we did in our particle manager, we need to set up our timers. So we get our dash timer, it's going to be timer.new, dash timer.oneShot, it's going to equal true, dash timer.waitTime, it's going to equal our dash duration. Let's see if we can fix the spelling errors real quick. We connect our dash timer on timeout to end dash, and we add child dash timer. Just to save some time, I'm just going to paste in the same thing with the cooldown timer. It is more or less the same thing, except we end when we connect to the timeout is going to be on refresh dash. Now we should be able to go play our game, and we should be able to right click on dash. Error, spelled that property wrong. Let's refresh this. Now we can dash. We have a little bit of a cooldown in between, and it's just a light effect. You can tweak the values to make it more intense if you want, but this should be able to get you set up with a pretty quick dash effect. We're getting one final error here, and the only thing we have to change is instead of modulate, we need modulate on the alpha. So now we shouldn't get any errors when we're dashing.